Okay, welcome everybody to the Atheist Society, a lecture on Thursday. Tonight we're honoured to have Dr. Joe Sampson, who's spoken to us many times before, typically on the December lecture, as he did last year. So welcome back, Joe. And tonight his topic is a critique of the biblical God.
Okay, my talk will go for now. I'd like to give it without interruption or comments and leave those till the end. Now, probably hard to read it, but I've put it in a PDF this talk, and John is going to put it up on the Atheist Society website soon, so you can download a copy if you want it. Before I give him a talk, I'll just briefly say my background. I was brought up a Catholic, and I went to Catholic schools for 12 years. Primary school, we had 3 hours a day of religion in primary school, and 1 hour a day in secondary school each day, and church every Sunday. So we were taught a lot about the Bible, and we were brought up to believe that it was all true, which I believed when I was young, but I came to have my doubts and stopped believing when I was 16. Okay, so this talk is about the God of the Christian Bible. Now, Christian apologists say that the Bible reveals a loving God. I will argue that the God of the Bible is not a loving God, but rather a hating God who is extremely violent and not a model of morality. I won't spend much time considering the question of whether this God exists. I argue he doesn't exist in a previous talk. First, I'll quote from some Catholic apologists in favour of the proposition that God is loving. I'm quoting only from Catholics because my upbringing was Catholic, and that is therefore the version of Christianity with which I'm most familiar. It is also a Catholic belief that God is all-knowing and all-powerful. Now, there are parts of the Bible that contradict these notions. On the one hand, the Catholic Church says that one should not kill, yet believes in the God in the Bible who killed lots of people. In the Catholic Bible for children, it says on page 9, all throughout the pages of the Old Testament, we meet a God who is filled with love, and he reaches out. He's so filled with love that he reaches out to his people again and again. Here's some quotations from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which I became familiar with as a child, the Catechism. On page 7, it says, God, infinitely perfect and blessed in himself, in a plan of sheer goodness, freely created man. On page 23, it says, I love God has revealed himself and given himself to man. On page 34, it says, the books of the Old Testament bear witness to the whole divine pedagogy of God's saving love. Page 61, God's very being is love. Page 71, nothing's impossible with God. Page 71, God creates by wisdom and love. Page 77, the Lord God is good to all, his compassion is over all that he has made. Page 97, God's infinitely good and his works are good. Page 544, you shall not kill. Page 545, do not slay the innocent and righteous. Page 545, infanticide is a grave crime. Right, so it's pretty clear. Quotes are clear. Catholic Church believes God's a loving being who can do anything and to whom killing is abhorrent. But I will show the biblical God does not have the traits that the Catholic Church claims he has. My biblical quotes are from the New Revised Standard Version Catholic edition of the Holy Bible, 1993. But you'll find the Protestant versions are very similar. The Bible contains 66 books, writings of numerous authors over more than 1,000 years. Now, the biblical God is the God that Jews, Christians, and Muslims believe in. A 2014 Gallup poll says that 28% of Americans believe the Bible is literally true. Now, that was 10 years ago, it's probably gone down since then. what these peoples are not aware of is that there is a number of contradictory passages in the Bible. Now, for example, chapter 13 of Godless by Daniel Barker points out biblical contradictions. He was a minister himself before he became an atheist. For example, Luke 1:37 says, with God nothing is impossible, whereas Judges 1:19 says, God was with Judah and he took possession of the hill country, but couldn't drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. So, on the one hand, God's supposed to be all powerful, but he couldn't help the Israelis drive these inhabitants out. The biblical view of creation is contradicted by scientific evidence that humans descended from animals. By tracing the ancestry of Joseph, husband of Jesus' mother, Mary, back to Adam, creationists have calculated the universe was created in 4004 BC. Now, the evidence from modern physics, in contrast, is that the universe is over 13 billion years old. My impression is that most Christians do not know much about the Bible that they believe in. The impression seems to be confirmed by an editorial published in Politics early in 2009, entitled Why a Year of the Bible Would Horrify Its Sponsors. It showed that Americans, of which in 2009 77% were Christians, more than 50% didn't know Genesis is the first book of the Bible. More than 50% cannot name one of the Gospels. More than 60% cannot name at least 5 of the 10 Commandments. More than 20% think that Moses was one of Jesus' disciples. 1 in 10 Americans think that Joan of Arc was Noah's wife. And more than 50% of high school seniors think that Sodom and Gomorrah was a married couple. So there's a lot of ignorance about the Bible. I can say I was brought up a Catholic and we were taught a lot about the Bible. I think the Catholics I was brought up with knew a lot about the Bible, but I think it's probably gone downhill, the education in more recent years. Apparently, a lot of Christians believe the Bible is literally true, but are not aware of a lot of its contents. Perhaps if those Christians read the Bible, they'd agree with Isaac Asimov, who said, properly read, the Bible is the most potent force for atheism ever conceived. It's a standard Christian belief that the God of the Bible is all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful. Now, if such a being exists, and being all-knowing, he'd know that suffering exists in the world. Being all-loving, he'd want to stop the suffering. Being all-powerful, he would be able to stop the suffering. Yet suffering occurs. Hence, I argue that an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful being doesn't exist. For example, 50 million people died in World War II, yet God did nothing to stop the war. The evidence is that the God of the Bible is neither all-knowing, all-loving, or all-powerful. The God of the Bible is far from the God that Christian clerics talk of when they say, do unto others as they would do unto you. God of the Bible will kill you for working on the Jewish Sabbath, will drown most of the human race, kill the Egyptian firstborn children, order the killing of homosexuals, the killing of adulterers, the killing of ethnic groups other than the Israelis, and will send you to burn in an everlasting fire for disobeying his commands. Christians claim that without God there's no morality. I argue, on the contrary, the biblical God is not a moral God. Empathy for other humans, I'll argue, occurs naturally. If we all behaved like the mafia, society would not be able to function. Now, if we were to take the Bible as a basis of morality, we would stone people to death for working on the Jewish Sabbath, stone disobedient children, sell our daughters into slavery, execute homosexuals. Sadly, that's happening today in some Muslim countries and what used to be done in Christian countries. In fact, in Victoria, until 1948, homosexuality was punishable by death. Now, if belief in the Bible were necessary for a moral society, then we would expect that the more atheist a society, the more dysfunctional it would be. In his book, The Moral Landscape, How Science Can Determine Human Values, Sam Harris quotes a survey that says 50% of Americans think that one must believe in God to have good values and to be moral. It goes on to say that on almost every measure of societal health, the least religious countries are better off than most religious. Countries like Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Netherlands, which are the most atheist societies on earth, consistently rate better than religious nations on measures like life expectancy, infant mortality, crime literacy, GDP, child welfare, economic equality, economic competitiveness, gender equality, healthcare, investments in education, rates of university enrolment, internet access, environmental protection, lack of corruption, political stability, and charity to poorer nations, etc. As societies become more prosperous, stable, and democratic, they tend to become more secular. Now, Zuckerman is a university sociology professor who specialises in studying people who aren't religious. He wrote in the book Society Without God. He lived in Scandinavia for 14 months, interviewing nearly 150 Danes and Swedes for the book. He said one study reports that only 51% of Danes and 26% of Swedes claim to believe in God. Another study found 24% of Danes and 16% of Swedes. He says, I argue that society without God is not only possible, it can be quite civil and pleasant. This admittedly polemical aspect of my book is aimed primarily countering the claims of certain outspoken Christians who regularly argue that a society without God would be hell on earth, rampant with immorality, full of evil and teeming with depravity. Well, it isn't. Denmark and Sweden are remarkably strong, safe, healthy, moral and prosperous societies. In fact, a good case can be made that among the best countries in the world, at least according to standard sociological measures. In an age of growing religious fundamentalism and strengthening the ties between religion and politics in the US as well as other countries, this is important information. It's quite crucial for people to know that it's actually quite possible for a society to lose its religious belief and still be well functioning, successful, and fully capable of constructing and obeying sound laws and following rational systems of morality and ethics. Worship of God can wane, prayer can be given up, Bible can go unstudied, people can still treat each other decently, schools and hospitals can still run smoothly, crime can remain minimal, babies and old people can receive all the care and attention they need, economies can flourish, pollution can be kept at a minimum, speeding tickets can be paid, and children can be loved in warm, secure homes, all without God being a central component of everyday life. Zuckerman pointed out the evidence shows that where people are non-believers, mainly, in God, are happy, flourishing societies. All right, so I'll go on to the Bible. Now, the Bible begins with God creating the heavens and the earth on the first day. Creates light and darkness on the first day, but doesn't create the sun till the fourth day. Now, we know from science that light on the earth comes from the sun, which came into existence before the earth. So here the Bible is an error. On day 3, God creates vegetation. On day 5, according to chapter 1 of Genesis, he creates fish and birds. On day 6, land creatures and humans. In chapter 2 of Genesis, Adam's the first human made on day 1, contradicting chapter 1 where he's made on day 5. So much for the theory that the Bible is literally true. It's contradictory in parts. After Adam is made, plants are made, then the animals. So in one part of Genesis, Adam's made before the animals, and another part after. So much for the theory that the Bible is literally true. The scientific evidence is that animals came before humans. There are creationists who deny evolution, even though there's plenty of evidence for it. For example, former US President George W. Bush said on the issue of evolution, the verdict is still out on how God created the earth. The Bible says that Adam was made out of dust. The creationists are unhappy about the belief of evolutionists that we're descended from animals, but happy with the belief we're descended from dust. Originally, God wants Adam to have an animal as a partner, but no animal suitable are found. So God takes a rib from Adam and creates Eve, the first woman, and Adam's partner. God puts Adam and Eve both naked in the Garden of Eden where plants provide lots of food. Tells Adam and Eve that they can eat fruit from every tree in the garden except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If they eat from that tree, they will die. Now, a talking snake tells Eve it is okay to eat from this tree, because if you do, you'll be like God, knowing good from evil. Eve then ate from the forbidden tree and gave some fruit to Adam, who ate it. Late in the evening, they heard God walking in the garden and hid themselves from him. God asked them where they were, and Adam replied he was afraid of God because he was naked. And then God realised they'd eaten from the forbidden tree. God then curses the serpent at Adam and Eve and tells them that they and their descendants will work the rest of their lives, eventually die. Now, it's pointed out by Charles Templeton in his book Farewell to God, there are all sorts of problems with this story. God of the Bible is not the all-knowing or loving God of Christian theology. He's incompetent. His plan for paradise and Eden fails. His plans don't work. He originally wants Adam to make an animal. He did not originally want Eve as Adam's partner. He's cruel. He tells the woman, I'll greatly increase your pains in childbearing. And to ensure she does get pregnant, she'll have desire for a husband. He's biased against women. He tells Eve that Adam shall rule over you. He's not all-knowing. When out for an evening walk in the garden, he asks Adam and Eve where they are and finds out only from questioning they ate from the forbidden tree. He can be tired. He rests on the seventh day after the first 6 days of creation. Now, the Catholic Church calls the disobedience of Adam original sin. This sin was passed on to all humans. Why did God not want Adam and Eve to know of good and evil? Did he want them to be just like animals? God is all-knowing as traditional Christian theology teaches, then he would have known that Adam and Eve would have disobeyed him. But the account of the Bible suggests otherwise. Now, Eve had sons, Cain, Abel, and Seth, and other sons and daughters. Eve had sons, Cain, Abel, and Seth, and other sons and daughters. Cain offered God some fruit while Abel offered sheep. God was happy with Abel's offering, but not Cain's. Why did God, supposedly a loving God, play favourites? Doesn't God like vegetarians? Cain later killed his brother Abel, and later Cain married and had a son called Enoch. The human race is descended from Adam and Eve, who had daughters. Cain's wife must have been his sister, so presumably God has no objection to incest, at least initially. Now, one of Adam's descendants was Noah. He was a righteous man. However, apart from Noah and his family, the rest of the human race was corrupt and violent. God decided to send a flood to kill the rest of the human race and kill most of the animals. God tells Noah to build an ark and take 2 male and mate of each animal. Later it says 7 pairs of clean animals and a pair of unclean animals onto the ark and stay on the ark while the whole earth was flooded. The remaining humans were killed along with most animals, leaving aside that there's no independent evidence of such a flood according to geologists, and the number of species is so large that they all be gathered in time and fitted in the ark. This, if it happened, is not the behaviour of a loving God. Killing on such a scale is mass murder of the type that is associated with people like Stalin, Mao Zedong and Pol Pot. This God is hardly one whose rules are the basis of morality. God has not yet given the 10 Commandments, yet has punished people for breaking them. When the waters recede, God says to Noah that never again will he send a flood to kill living things, and the rainbow sent by God to remind humans of his promise. Well, several hundred years ago, Isaac Newton explained the rainbow as passing of light through water in the air with different colours, with different colours passing at different angles. Rainbows have been around a long time ago before the supposed Great Flood. If all the human race are descendants from Noah, where did the Chinese and Negroes come from? If they have different features due to being in different climates, it suggests evolution. Now, at one stage, according to the Bible, everyone spoke the same language. A number of people in a town called Babel decided to build a tower so that it would reach heaven. God was so annoyed that he gave each person a different language so they wouldn't understand each other and not proceed with the Tower of Babel. It seems cruel of God to give each person a different language. Now, one of Noah's descendants was Abram, later called Abraham. At age 75, he's told by God to leave his country of Mesopotamia and go to Canaan to set up a new nation. He left with his wife Sarai and nephew Lot. Now, when they reached Canaan, there was a famine there, so they went to Egypt. When they reached Egypt, Abram told his wife that as she was very beautiful, they would kill him if they learned she was his wife. So told her to say she was his sister. The Egyptian officials praised Sarai to the Pharaoh who made her his wife. As the Pharaoh thought Abram was her brother, he gave Abram donkeys, camels, and male and female slaves. God apparently has no objection to slaves. God is not being loving and approving of slaves, nor does God object to Abram's lying that Sarai is not his wife. If you can see it, that's our drawing of the flood. Might be a bit hard to see on the screen. God then afflicted the Pharaoh with plagues. How can God justify such cruelty? When the Pharaoh discovers that Sarai is Abram's wife, he tells Abram to leave Egypt. Abram went to the town of Bethel where he became wealthy. Abram complained to God that he is childless and a slave will be his heir. As Abram and Sarai were childish, Sarai told Abram to have sex with his Egyptian slave girl Hagar with the hope of her becoming pregnant. When Hagar became pregnant, she looked with contempt on Sarai. When Sarai complained about this to Abram, he told her he could do what she liked with Hagar. Sarai dealt harshly with Hagar, so that Hagar ran away. One of God's angels found her and asked where she was from and where she's going. Hagar told the angel, and the angel then told her to return to Sarai and submit to her. The angel was not compassionate. When Abram was 99, God told him his name was now Abraham. His covenant with Abraham is that he'll give Canaan to his successors for perpetuity. God chose to let Abraham's descendants take over Canaan from its inhabitants, the Canaanites. God shows no concern for the Canaanites. The belief amongst modern Israelis that God gave Israel to Jews forever, I suggest, is part of the cause of the modern Israeli-Palestine conflict. Loving God would not favour one race over another. God tells Abraham that to keep his covenant, every male among you, including slaves, must be circumcised. Abraham is now 99 years old and was circumcised along with every male in the house. God who demands such cruel procedure is not a loving God. God told Abraham to change Sarai's name to Sarah. Now, God tells 100 years old Abraham that Sarah at age 90 will have a child named Isaac. God said that there'd been a great outcry against the towns of Sodom as their inhabitants had sinned gravely. God said he must go to the cities to see whether the outcry was justified. Despite the traditional belief God's all-knowing, God's not all-knowing on this matter. Abraham asked God not to destroy Sodom if there are 50 righteous people in the city. So God agreed not to destroy Sodom if 50 righteous people are found. And Abraham got God not to destroy Sodom if there are 45 righteous people, and so on it went. God will not destroy Sodom if there are 40 righteous people, and 30, and 20, and 10. We have Abraham bargaining with God, supposedly a totally loving being, on how many people have to be righteous for Sodom to escape destruction. So if there are only 9 righteous people in Sodom, God will destroy Sodom. This is supposedly a loving God, prepared to kill initially 49 righteous people, but after bargaining with a supposedly less moral human, prepared to kill 9 righteous people. This is hardly an empathetic God. Lot was a nephew of Abraham. 2 angels came to Lot's house in Sodom for dinner. Then all the men of Sodom came to Lot's house and said they wanted to have sex with the angels. Lot told him not to have sex with the angels, but instead have sex with his two virgin daughters and do what they like with them. We have Lot saying it's okay to gang rape his daughters, and some Christians say the Bible's a good book. How can they justify this? The angels then blinded the men so they wouldn't find the door of the house. In the morning, the angels told Lot to take his wife and daughters and flee the city because God was going to destroy it and not to look back. God then rained fire from heaven on Sodom and Gomorrah, and because Lot's wife looked back, turned her into a pillar of salt. God was cruel not only in killing the citizens, inhabitants, but also Lot's wife. We are not looking at a God of love, but a God of hate. Lot went with his daughters to the town of Zoar. One night, the daughters decided to get Lot drunk so they can have sex with him to produce children. So they became pregnant by their father and bore sons by him. God showed no disapproval of this. God then commanded Abraham to take his son to a mountain and kill him as an offering to God. Abraham took Isaac to the mountain and was about to stab him with a knife when an angel of God called to him from heaven not to kill Isaac. God was testing Abraham to see whether he would always obey him. A God who would tell a man to kill his son is not a loving God, but rather a cruel God. Now, Isaac had two twin sons, Esau and Jacob. One night, Jacob wrestled with a man till daybreak. Eventually, the man pleaded with Jacob to stop, but would not till he blessed him. The man, who was God, said that henceforth Jacob would be called Israel, and a nation would descend from him. In the wrestling, Jacob prevailed over God, which is contrary to the Christian belief that God's all powerful. Israel and his family settled in Egypt. Eventually, Israel's descendants, the Israelites, became numerous in Egypt. They eventually were made slaves. The Israelites didn't like being slaves, so God decided to help them. One of the Israelites, Moses, one day sees a burning bush. God spoke to him from the fire, saying, "He will liberate the Israelites from Egypt and give the Israelites control of Canaan." God told Moses to tell Pharaoh to free the Israelites. God says he will harden the Pharaoh's heart so he won't let his people go. God then proceeds to punish the Egyptian people because the Pharaoh won't let the people go, even though it's because God hardened the Pharaoh's heart. God sends 10 different plagues to Egypt to try to get the Pharaoh to release the Israelites. This shows a cruel God punishing a whole innocent nation for what Pharaoh did. The first plague was all the waters were turned to blood. The second was frogs everywhere. Next, gnats are everywhere. Then flies everywhere. Then livestock are diseased. Next, boils on all humans and animals. Next, thunder and hail and fire. Next, the plague of locusts. And the land was dark for 3 days. With the 10th plague, all the firstborn children were to be killed. Moses told the Israelites to each kill a lamb, put its blood on the door so that when God passes their houses, he won't kill their firstborn. As God does not know which houses are Israelite, this is contrary to Christian theology, which says God is all-knowing. A God who kills firstborn children is a monster. And interestingly, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it says that infanticide is a grave crime, yet God has clearly committed infanticide. The Bible says there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there's a house where someone dead. Oh, yeah, there's something missing. There's not a house without someone dead. God is here not shown as a God who loves all nations, but rather one who kills people of one nation to favour another nation, his chosen people. This is not a God worthy of our love. After this mass slaughter, Pharaoh asked the Israelites to leave. The Israelites then asked the Egyptians for silver and golden clothing. Text then says, and so they plundered the Egyptians. The Israelites then, with their flocks and herds, headed to Canaan, the promised land. God told Moses to turn back the Israelites to give the impression to the Egyptians they are lost. God's being Machiavellian. The Pharaoh then sent his troops after the Israelites. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea like that, and God caused the sea to be driven back by a wind and turned a region covered by the sand to dry land. The Israelites crossed the dry seabed to the other side. The Pharaoh's army followed, but then God told Moses to stretch his arm again like that, and then the sea returned, drowning the army. Now, God, if he were a God of love, instead of hardening Pharaoh's heart, softened his heart so the Israelites would leave. The violence hasn't ended, though. God will order the slaying of the people of Canaan, so his people will live there. The supposed God of love, who loves all nations, will collude in ethnic cleansing. The Israelites eventually entered the Sinai wilderness. They camped in front of a mountain called Mount Sinai. Then God called Moses from the mountain, saying, "Tell the Israelites, you've seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all people. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy kingdom and holy nation." Here's the God who Christian clerics say loves all nations, giving preferential treatment to one nation. God then tells Moses, "I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud in order that the people may hear when I speak with you and so trust you ever after." God told Moses that on the third day, God will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. God said to Moses, "You shall set limits for the people all around, saying, be careful not to go up the mountain or touch the edge of it. Anyone who touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch them, but they shall be stoned or shot with arrows. Whether animal or human being, they shall not live. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they may go up on the mountain." Here, the supposed God of love is saying he'll kill anyone who goes up the mountain, kill any human or animal who touches someone who goes on the mountain. This is the behaviour not of a loving being, but rather a hating dictator. The Bible goes on to say on the morning of the third day was thunder and lightning, as well as a thick cloud on the mountain, and the blast of a trumpet so loud that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God. They took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now, Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. The smoke went up like the smoke of a kiln, while the whole mountain shook violently. As the blast of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses would speak and God would answer in thunder. God told Moses to come up the mountain with his brother Aaron. God then spoke a large number of commandments, beginning with what are known as 10 commandments, which are as follows. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that's in heaven above on the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I am the Lord your God, a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing a steadfast love to the thousandth generation of those who love me, my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but on the seventh day, it's a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You won't do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in the 6 days that God made heaven and earth, sea and all there is, in him he rested on the seventh day. Therefore God blessed the Sabbath and consecrated it. Honour your father and your mother, so your days may be long in the land that the Lord God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbour. You shall not covet your neighbour's house. You shouldn't covet your neighbour's wife or male or female slave or ox or donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbour. Now, the first 4 commandments about humans' required relation with God. God punishes children up to the 4th generation for the wrongdoing of their ancestors, hardly the behaviour of a loving God. God says you shall not murder, but as we've seen, God does not practice what he preaches. God says that you shall not covet your neighbour's wife, but does not say that you shall not covet your neighbour's husband. In the fourth commandment, it says slaves must not work on the Sabbath, so God has no objection to slaves, hardly a loving God. After the Ten Commandments, God gives a whole lot of other commandments. Again, a lot of these are cruel. God gives rules about slaves. It's okay for a man to sell his daughter as a slave. Anyone who strikes or curses his or her father will be put to death. If a slave owner strikes a slave with a rod and the slave dies immediately, the owner shall be punished. But if the slave survives a day or two, there's no punishment. God is uncivilized, for he says, if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. And some Christians claim you can't be moral without believing in God, but this God is hardly moral. God said, you shall not permit a female sorcerer to live. Now, because of such a commandment, many so-called witches were put to death in medieval Europe. There's a drawing there, you might say, of people being put to death for being witches, burnt at the stake. Even today in Saudi Arabia, people are executed for sorcery. 70 elders went to Mount Sinai and saw God. After stating his commandments, God went on to promise the Israelites they'll conquer Canaan, wiping out the inhabitants because they've done any wrong. God is a harsh, chauvinistic warrior. Moses and Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu, and 70 elders went to Mount Sinai and saw God. Sometime later, when Nadab and Abihu offered God the wrong incense, God burnt them all alive. That's in Leviticus. Such a vengeful God. In Leviticus, God says, you shall not lie with a man as with a woman. It's an abomination. Such a verse has been used to justify killing or jailing homosexuals for several centuries. One would think that God, being the creator of all living things, would know that homosexuality is observed in numerous species and is quite natural. Leviticus has God saying not to take vengeance. This is from a God who kills people in revenge. God says that if a daughter of a priest becomes a prostitute, she must be burnt alive. God's hardly being infinitely merciful here. In Leviticus, it says there was a man who cursed God, and Moses asked God, what will we do with him? God says he should be stoned to death for blasphemy, and God's orders are carried out. God is thin-skinned. In Leviticus, God says you may acquire slaves from nations around you. How can merciful God allow slaves? In Leviticus, God specifies the rewards for obedience to his commands. If you follow my statutes and keep my commandments and observe them faithfully, I will give you rains in their season, and the land shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit, and I'll grant peace in the land, and you'll lie down, no one shall make you afraid. You'll give chase to your enemies, they shall fall by the sword, and I will walk among you. God promises a comfortable life for those who follow his commands. What, however, happens to those who don't obey his commands? God says, if you won't obey me and do not observe these commandments, I will turn and do this to you. I'll bring terror to you, consumption and terror that waste your eyes and cause life to pine away. You shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. I'll set my face against you, and you shall be struck down by your enemies. I will set loose wild animals against you, and they shall bereave you of your children and destroy your livestock. They shall make you few in number, and your roads shall be deserted. You shall eat the flesh of your sons, and you shall eat the flesh of your daughters. This is a vengeful God who will turn people into cannibals. In Numbers, God tells Moses how to check whether a wife has been unfaithful. Interestingly, God has no test for an unfaithful husband. If a man suspects his wife has been unfaithful, he'll take her to a priest who will take some holy water mixed with dirt from the tabernacle, a tent which the Israelites carried around. The woman was to drink the polluted water. If the woman was unfaithful, the water will cause bitter pain and her uterus will drop. If the woman's been faithful, she'll be immune and able to conceive children. This is a harsh punishment. I wonder how many Christians would support this even though God commanded it. Eventually, God commanded the Israelites to leave Sinai, which they did. People in the new place started complaining they had only bread to eat, whereas in Egypt they had lots of meat. God promised them they would have so much meat for the next month they'd be tired of it. So God sent a strong wind that blew quails in from the sea until Israel's camp was completely surrounded with birds, got up about a metre high for many kilometres in every direction. The people picked up quails for 2 days. Each person filled at least 10 large baskets. But before the meat could be eaten, God became angry and sent a deadly disease through the camp. After they buried the people who'd been so greedy for meat, they called the place graves for the greedy. God once again is punishing the people very harshly. In Numbers 12, it says that a place called Hazeroth, Miriam, sister of Moses and Aaron complained, asking why God speaks only through Moses and not through them. God came down and spoke to Miriam, Moses, and Aaron. God said, "Here where there are prophets among you, I, the Lord, speak to them in dreams. Not so with my servant Moses. He's entrusted with all my house. Will I speak face to face clearly, not in riddles?" God says he doesn't speak in riddles when speaking to Moses, but those Christian apologists who say the Bible is metaphorical are shown to be incorrect. So when God says a female sorcerer should be put to death, he means it. God was so angry at Miriam for questioning him that he gave her leprosy, more cruelty from God. God then told Moses to send out some men to spy on the land of Canaan, which God has promised to the Israelites. So some men spied and came back and said the land's wealthy, but the land couldn't be conquered because the occupants are stronger than them. And the congregation complained, so they should go back to Egypt and choose a leader to take them there. God appeared to Moses and says, "He would exterminate the Israelites. He's so fed up with them." God then pleads with God not to kill his people because other nations will hear about it. And if you kill this people all at one time, then the nations who have heard about it will say, "It's because the Lord was not able to bring people into the land he swore to give them, that he slaughtered them in the wilderness." So Moses asked God to reverse his decision to kill off all the Israelites. Moses talked him out of the genocide of his chosen people because it'd be bad for God's reputation. God is vain and quick to anger. God then went on to kill by plague most of the people who'd spied on Canaan, except for those who hadn't complained. Foreign Dathan and Abram and 250 other men questioned Moses' leadership. As punishment, God had the earth swallow up Korah, Dathan and Abram and their families, and God burnt alive the 250 men. Such an unpleasant God. Then all the Israelites rebelled against Aaron and Moses, saying, "You've killed the people of the Lord." God became angry and sent down a plague that killed 14,700 people, more murdered by supposedly loving God. Shortly after, God told the Israelites to attack the Midianites and kill every male. Moses went to the army commander saying he was unhappy they had not killed the women. Then told them to kill all male children and all women who weren't virgins. All female virgins the men can keep for themselves. So God's not in agreement with the Geneva Convention. God then sent messengers to King Sihon of Heshbon, asking for the Israelites to be allowed to travel on roads throughout the kingdom, pass into the land of God promised the Israelites. In Deuteronomy, it says, but the king wouldn't let them pass through. So God hardened his spirit and made his heart to find in order to hand them over to you. God made the king unwilling to let them through so they could win battle over Heshbon. God's clearly taking sides and is unconcerned that people will die in battle. So the Israelites captured all the king's towns and killed all the men, women, and children. They kept the livestock and plundered the towns. God is a God of war with no qualms about killing people, not the empathetic God of Christian theologians. In Deuteronomy, God says, when the Lord brings you into the land, entering to possess and drives you out before many nations, 7 nations larger and stronger than you, And when God's delivered them to you and you've defeated them, you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them and show no mercy. Don't intermarry with them. Don't give your daughters their sons or take their daughters for your sons. For you'll turn your children away from following me to serve other gods. And God's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. This is what you are to do to them. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their poles and burn their idols in fire. You are a people holy to the Lord your God. God has chosen you to be his people. This is a God who advocates genocide and chauvinism. This is an angry God who will murder his own people if they don't obey him. Today we have the Israelis who think they have a God-given right to have dispossessed the Palestinians, kill them and treat them as second-class citizens. Similarly, he thought that he had God on his side to justify his warring against other nations and causing mass bloodshed. In Deuteronomy, God shows he's intolerant of other religions, demanding severe punishment of Israelites who worship other gods. If your very own brother or your son or daughter or the wife you love or your closest friend secretly entices you, saying, let's go and worship other gods, gods that neither you nor your ancestors have known, gods of peoples around you, do not yield to them or listen to them. Show them no pity, don't spare them or shield them. You must certainly put them to death. Your hand must be the first in putting them to death, and then the hands of all the people. Stone them to death because they tried to turn you away from God who brought you out of Egypt. Then all Israel will hear and be afraid, and no one among you will do such an evil thing again. And God's so intolerant that he orders the killing of people who worship other gods. This text seems to imply that other God exists. We see in some Muslim countries today the same intolerance of Muslims who convert to other religions or atheism. Such people can be executed. Nor will people who disobey God be killed, but also those who disobey God's priest or judge. And God says anyone who shows contempt for judges or priests will be put to death. You must purge this evil from Israel. God has no objection to soldiers raping enemy women, as in Deuteronomy. When you go to war against your enemies, he says, the Lord God gives them to you, and you take captives. And if you take captives and you notice amongst them a beautiful woman and are attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. Bring her to your home, have her shave her head, trim her nose, and put aside the clothes she's wearing when captured. After she's lived in your house and mourned her father and mother for a month, then you may go to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. In recent years, we've seen Islamic State soldiers taking women as sex slaves, all in the name of the Abrahamic God. God's not a merciful God in dealing with rebellious children, for he says if someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who won't obey his parents and won't listen to them, his father and mother shall take hold of them, take them to the elders at the gate of the town and tell the elders, our son is stubborn and rebellious, and then the men of the town stone him to death. This is an extreme way of handling rebellious children. God's no Dr. Spock. God has partial laws about sex relations. He says in Deuteronomy, if a man believes his wife's not a virgin, he shall tell the elders of the city, and if the elders of the city are convinced she's not a virgin, she'll be stoned to death. If a man's found sleeping with another man's wife, they will be put to death. You must purge this evil. If a man happens to meet in a town of virgins pledged to be married and he sleeps with her, both of them will be stoned to death. But on the other hand, if a man in the country meets a young woman pledged to be married and rapes her, only the man will be put to death. If a man happens to meet a virgin who's not pledged to be married and rapes her, and they are discovered, he shall pay the father 50 shekels of silver. He must marry the young woman, for he has violated her. He can't divorce her. So God will put a couple to death for consensual sex, but for rape of a virgin, the punishment's only a fine, and the woman must marry the rapist. God's hardly a compassionate, forgiving being. God yet again shows harshness in Deuteronomy when he says, two men are fighting, and the wife of one of them comes to rescue her husband from the assailant, and she reaches out and seizes him by his private parts. You shall cut off her hand. Show no pity. God doesn't approve of cross-dressing. I wonder whether this applies to a Scotsman wearing a kilt. God has lots of harsh punishment. He says, if you don't obey the Lord your God and don't follow all his commands and decrees, all these curses will come upon you. You'll be cursed in the city and cursed in the country. Your basket and your kneading trough will be cursed. The fruit of your womb will be cursed, and the crops of your land, calves of your herds will be cursed. You'll be cursed when you come in, cursed when you go out. So God will plague you with diseases until he's destroyed you from the land entering to possess. The Lord will strike you with wasting disease, fever and inflammation, scorching heat and drought, with blight and mildew, which will plague you until you perish. The sky over your head will be bronze, the ground beneath you iron. The Lord will turn the ruin of your country, rain the country into dust and powder. It will come down from the sky till you're destroyed. God will cause you to be defeated. The carcasses will be food for the birds and wild animals. The Lord will afflict you with the boils of Egypt and with tumours, festering sores and itch from which you can't be cured. God will afflict you with madness, blindness, confusion of mind. It's pretty harsh. God taught Moses a song he wanted Moses to teach the Israelites. Part of the song, the words are, when the Most High apportioned the nations, when he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of gods. The Lord's own portion was his people. Now, the implication here seems to be that the Most High is a higher God than Yahweh, the Jewish God, and each nation has its own God. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak nor his strength gone. Joshua then took over as leader of the Israelites. And God said, now Moses is dead. Joshua, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm just about to give you. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the great river Euphrates to the Mediterranean. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. So Joshua ordered the officers to go through the camp, get ready because we're going to cross the Jordan and take possession of the land God's giving you. So God sent spies there. Joshua sent spies there, and spies returned to Joshua. So the Lord's given the whole land into our hands. All the people are afraid because they know what happened when the Egyptians followed the Israelites across the Red Sea. So Joshua came with the Israelites, and they came to the Jordan River, and God stopped the waters flowing so they could cross the river to opposite Jericho. And God commanded 7 priests walk around the city blowing trumpets, which caused the city's walls to crumble. The Israelites invaded the city, killing all the inhabitants except a small number who cooperated. And God's quite happy that the Israelites have murdered all the people of Jericho, such a harsh God. It's told in Judges, the people of Gibeon, after hearing what Israelites had done to Jericho, they made a treaty with the Israelites. But the kings of other neighbouring cities heard about what had happened, and so they attacked Gibeon. The Gibeonites then asked Joshua to help them. Joshua's forces attacked forces of the kings, whose armies fled, and then God threw down huge hailstones from heaven, and more people died from the hailstones than were killed with the sword. And God made the sun to stand still for a day, so the Israelites could defeat these kings, for which there's no evidence. And so the 5 kings that were caught were hanged by Joshua, and Eventually, Joshua defeated 31 kings and killed the inhabitants of all their cities. So much for the theory of God's whole being is love. So now my talk goes on and on. It'll take another half hour, so I won't go through it because it'll take too long. But my talk will be put up on the internet, but I'll just conclude. The God of the Old Testament is not a loving God, but rather a God who kills and tortures people for the most trivial of reasons. He's an ethnic cleanser and hater of homosexuals. He's not a source of morality by any standard. And in the New Testament, Jesus equates himself with the God of the Old Testament, saying, I am the Father of one, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. So Jesus identified himself with the God who killed so many people in the Old Testament. Jesus spoke of hell where the fire never goes out, and said on the last day, God will send out his angels, and they'll weed out of the kingdom everything that causes sin. And they'll be thrown into the blazing furnace where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I'll say, depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting hellfire prepared for the devil and his angels. So a God who makes people suffer forever is not a loving being, but rather a sadistic monster. So my conclusion, which I know Christians won't believe, is that the God of the Bible is not a God of love, but rather a God of hate.
Okay, before we move on to questions, I'd just like to go through a few announcements. There's a few other events that are taking place. Some that I know of are, for example, on Friday week, the 20th, is the Humanist meeting in the Elsenwick Hotel. And after that, I think the next Atheist pub night would be the 1st of January in the same place. We would like to thank the Unitarians for allowing us to use their hall. So we'll be passing around a bowl, and if you've got any of that ancient holding stuff called cash, please generously donate that. Questions from the audience or comments?
I'm just going to argue a few little points.
Yeah.
Now, the Jews point out that their God is a God of all good and all evil. Now, we've been misled by Zarathustra, who created an equal God of good and an equal God of evil. But the Jews say all good and evil comes from this one God. So you pray to that God, he might send you good, but if you act up, he might send you evil. So I think there's a point of theology there.
Yeah, I know it says in the Bible, evil comes from God too. But I'm saying from the Christian point of view, that's not true. That God is good. He's not evil. I've quoted from the Catholic.
No, he's good and evil.
Well, that's not the traditional view.
Well, see, this is the heresy of Zarathustra that was spread into Christianity.
Well, I was brought up Catholic. We're told God is good. I've quoted from Catholic documents, and they say he's all loving, all good. They don't say he's evil.
Okay, I've got a question. When you go to the church, they give you a sermon and they give you a Bible reading. It's always selective readings that that try to show how good God is. So most of what we've had today, they would never ever read that out in a church, even though it's in the Bible.
Well, I got it at a Catholic school.
A lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're told about the flood. We're told about the killing of the firstborn children in Egypt.
Yes.
About Joshua killing all the people in Jericho. No, we're taught all that. A lot of it. And as a child, I accepted it.
Well, I mean, there's just so many bad things that you've quoted to us tonight that I find it shocking that people still believe that this is a so-called loving God. But just as a matter of curiosity, a lot of the stuff you quoted was from the first few books of the Bible. A
Yeah.
lot of it was from Exodus and what.
Yeah, well, I was trying to do more, but I would have taken another half hour.
What were the main sort of sources of the books of the Bible that you're using?
The Bible itself.
Which, Exodus, Genesis, Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
Which ones?
Well, I've got it here: Genesis, Leviticus, Numbers. Yeah, I didn't get very far.
So that's possibly the first half dozen or 8 or 9 books of the Bible.
Deuteronomy, yeah, it's earlier stuff, yeah. But it's still about God.
John.
When you were doing references, what I noticed was you were giving page numbers for a certain book.
Yeah.
Did you know that most of the book is, it's under chapters, it's under sections, and it's got line numbers.
Yeah.
Line numbers.
He was quoting page numbers. I was confused by that.
Yeah, you were quoting page numbers instead of going to the trouble of saying chapter, verse.
Yeah, I did.
Number, that kind of thing.
21, I did 21. Chapter 21.
Oh, okay, so you were giving that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But in my talk, I didn't mention it. It's in my...
Oh, but in your talk, you didn't mention it. But,
no, I just said it in Deuteronomy.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't. The Jews were in Egypt 600 BC, very earlier, but they were there long before Palestine.
I'm talking about the present day. The present day Jews came from Europe mainly to go to Israel. In 1900, there were hardly any Jews in modern day Israel.
And I think even in the Bible, it was quoted that the Canaanites were there, and the Israelites were given the land, and they dispossessed the Canaanites. It's part of the Bible story.
Yeah.
Could it be that the Lord has found Palestinians naughty, and after a long period of punishment, he's given the land back to the Jews?
Yeah, well, the Palestinians have Allah on their side and the Jews have Yahweh. At the moment, Yahweh's winning. Well, Yahweh and Allah is supposed to be the same God.
Yeah, we'll say that was when he's up to kings praying to God, so God flipped the coin.
Yeah, it's not funny seeing so many people are dying there.
I think it's a very instructive talk that Joe has given us today, because if you ask people, blindly religious Americans, for example, who blindly follow cult leaders, they think that their God is a kind and loving God. And the point is that the text of the Bible itself totally contradicts that belief, and yet they still believe it.
The Bible points out God is both love and wrath. Any 19th century hellfire priest would say it's also a God of wrath. Beware. You could be both.
So he would punish people for doing the right thing. They didn't do it genocide.
Yeah.
Now, the church says God's good, Satan's evil. They're the two forces.
That's the
No, that's the church teaching.
I think the theology is that God has 3 properties: omnipotence, omniscience, and benevolence, like all-knowing, all-powerful, and all kind and loving.
But as I pointed out,
But none of those things are actually true.
in the Bible, no.
They contradict each other to start. But even then, none of them are actually true according to the text of the Bible. I'd like to draw the formal proceedings for a close for tonight and for this year. and we'll be resuming not in January but in February, when Robert Bender will be giving an oration in relation to Darwin Day, as is the usual procedure. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you again for Joe.